Deep in the Colorado Rockies, Maya Chen hammered another loose floorboard into place, her 6-month belly making every movement awkward. The inheritance from her grandmother couldn't have come at a better time, pregnant, broke, and running from an abusive ex who'd never stop hunting her. What she didn't expect was the hollow sound echoing from above when she accidentally hit the ceiling beam. Maya paused, hammer suspended mid-swing. The sound had been distinctly different from the solid thunk of wood meeting wood. This was hollow, reverberating, as if there was empty space beyond the weathered pine ceiling. She straightened slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, and stared upward at the rough-hewn beams her grandmother had mentioned in passing letters, but never really explained. The cabin had been in the Chen family for 3 generations, though Maya had only visited twice as a child. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had been a private woman who preferred the isolation of the mountains to the chaos of city life. When the lawyer called 6 months ago to inform Maya of her inheritance, it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. David's escalating violence had left her with bruises that makeup couldn't hide and a bank account he'd systematically drained. Now, standing alone in the musty cabin with afternoon sunlight filtering through grimy windows, Maya felt the familiar itch of professional curiosity. 5 years as a forensic architect had trained her to notice discrepancies, to question spaces that didn't make sense, and this cabin was full of questions. She retrieved her measuring tape from the toolbox, moving carefully across the uneven floorboards. The main room measured 24 feet by 16 feet, with 10-foot ceilings, or so it appeared from the inside. But when she'd walked the exterior perimeter yesterday, the roofline suggested at least 14 feet of vertical space. 4 feet were unaccounted for. Maya climbed onto the wobbly kitchen chair she'd been using as a stepladder and ran her fingers along the ceiling joints. The wood was definitely original to the 1940s construction, but the joints were too clean, too deliberate. Someone had built this ceiling to conceal something above it. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and her blood turned to ice when she saw David's name on the screen. "Found your forwarding address at the post office. You can't hide forever." Maya's hands shook as she deleted the message. She'd been careful, so careful. Used a P.O. box in Denver, paid cash for everything, disabled location services on her phone. But David was nothing if not persistent. The bruises on her ribs had healed, but the memory of his fury when she'd threatened to leave still made her nauseous. She needed to focus on making this place livable, not chasing architectural mysteries. But, as she tried to return to the floorboards, her eyes kept drifting upward. The professional in her couldn't let it go. By evening, Maya had convinced herself that investigation was practical, not just curiosity. If there was structural damage or pest infestation in a hidden space, she needed to know about it. The baby was due in 3 months, and she couldn't afford any expensive surprises. She found a crowbar in her grandmother's tool shed and positioned the kitchen table beneath what seemed like the weakest point in the ceiling. The wood was soft with age, and after 20 minutes of careful prying, a section of planking came loose with a groan of protest. Stale air rushed down, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something organic and unsettling. Maya hoisted herself onto the table, flashlight in hand, and peered into the dark space above. The beam of light revealed a room that shouldn't exist, not just empty space, but a fully finished room with actual furniture draped in decades of dust. A small bed with a metal frame, a wooden chair, a child's rocking horse with painted eyes that seemed to watch her in the flashlight's glow. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she widened the opening enough to climb through. The forensic architect in her noted the quality of construction. Someone had taken great care to seal this room completely. The air was stagnant but not moldy, suggesting it had been airtight for decades. On a small table near the bed, she found a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked with age, and the pages yellowed, but the handwriting inside was still legible. The first entry was dated September 15, 1943. "We've been here 2 weeks now. Thomas says it's only temporary, but I'm starting to wonder if anyone knows where we are." Maya sank onto the dusty bed, journal trembling in her hands. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1943. Thomas hasn't come back. The baby is getting sick, and Emma won't stop crying. Someone locked us in. I can hear them downstairs, but they won't answer when we call. God help us. I think we're going to die here. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows, and from somewhere above her head came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The sound came again at 3 in the morning, a deliberate scraping like furniture being dragged across floorboards. Maya pressed her palm against her rounded belly, feeling the baby's restless movements mirror her own unease. 6 months pregnant and sleeping like a cat anyway, she'd grown accustomed to the cabin's nighttime symphony of settling wood and winter wind. But this was different. This came from above. She nudged David's shoulder. He mumbled something incoherent about quarterly reports and rolled away, dead to the world as usual. Maya envied his ability to sink into oblivion the moment his head hit the pillow, but tonight it left her feeling utterly alone with the mystery overhead. The scraping stopped. Maya held her breath, straining to hear. Nothing but David's steady breathing and the distant hoot of an owl. She was almost convinced she'd imagined it when a single, sharp thud echoed through the ceiling directly above their bed. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She slipped from beneath the covers, her bare feet finding the cold, hardwood floor. The cabin felt different in the darkness, older somehow, as if the night had awakened something that daylight kept dormant. She grabbed David's heavy flashlight from the bedside table and padded toward the living room. The main room of the cabin stretched before her, moonlight filtering through the picture window and casting everything in silver and shadow. Maya had fallen in love with this place the moment they'd toured it 6 months ago. The real estate agent had called it a charming rustic retreat, neglecting to mention the way the walls seemed to whisper secrets, or how the ceiling creaked with footsteps that had no earthly source. She aimed the flashlight upward, sweeping the beam across the exposed wooden beams. Everything looked normal, the same rustic planking they'd admired when they signed the lease. But as the light traced the far corner above what had once been the kitchen, something caught her eye. A thin line in the wood grain that seemed too straight, too deliberate to be natural. Maya dragged one of the kitchen chairs across the room, its legs scraping against the floor in an echo of the sound that had awakened her. She climbed carefully, one hand bracing against her belly, and directed the flashlight's beam toward the suspicious seam. It wasn't a flaw in the wood. It was a perfectly rectangular outline, about 3 feet by 2 feet, cut so precisely into the ceiling that it was nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. A hidden panel. The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her excitement, and Maya nearly lost her balance. She gripped the back of the chair with her free hand, steadying herself. The smart thing would be to climb down, wait until morning, wake David, and investigate together. But something compelled her forward, a magnetism she couldn't explain, as if whatever lay beyond that panel had been calling to her long before tonight. She pressed against one corner of the rectangle. The wood gave slightly, confirming her suspicion. It was a concealed access point, probably leading to crawl space or storage area that the previous owners had forgotten to mention. Maya pushed harder, and the panel shifted with a soft grinding sound. A shower of dust and debris rained down, making her cough and squeeze her eyes shut. When she opened them, a dark rectangular hole gaped above her, exhaling the musty scent of long enclosed air. She raised the flashlight, peering into the void. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just empty storage space. The flashlight's beam revealed floorboards, actual finished flooring extending back into darkness. This wasn't an attic or crawl space, it was a room, a secret room that someone had gone to considerable trouble to conceal. Maya's rational mind screamed at her to climb down, to wait for daylight and David's steadying presence. But her curiosity burned brighter than her caution. She was already reaching up, grasping the edge of the opening, when a sound from the hidden space froze her blood. Breathing. Slow, measured breathing that definitely didn't belong to her. Maya's grip loosened in shock, and she would have fallen if not for a desperate grab at the chair back. The flashlight tumbled from her other hand, clattering to the floor and rolling away, its beams spinning crazy patterns across the walls before coming to rest, aimed at nothing useful. In the sudden darkness, the breathing stopped. Maya clung to the chair, her own breath coming in short gasps, listening with every fiber of her being. Had she imagined it? The silence stretched so long that she began to think she had, began to feel foolish for her terror. Then, directly above her head, something moved. Not breathing this time, but a definite shifting weight, as if someone had just taken a careful step across the hidden floor. Someone was up there. Someone who now knew they'd been discovered. Maya's pregnancy-clumsy fingers fumbled for her cell phone, only to remember she'd left it charging on the nightstand. The darkness pressed around her like a living thing, and somewhere overhead, a presence waited in perfect predatory silence. The ladder creaked ominously under Maya's weight as she climbed toward the opening in the ceiling. Each rung felt loose beneath her feet, and she wondered how long it had been since anyone had used it. The musty smell grew stronger as she ascended, mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify, something metallic and stale. Her head emerged through the opening into complete darkness. Maya fumbled for her phone's flashlight, and the beam cut through the blackness to reveal a space that shouldn't exist. The room was larger than she'd expected, running nearly the full length of the cabin above what she'd assumed was just crawl space. Wooden planks formed a crude floor, and the peaked roof created enough height for her to stand upright in the center. Dust particles danced in her phone's light like tiny ghosts, but it was what filled the space that made her breath catch. Against one wall stood a makeshift desk fashioned from old crates, its surface covered with yellowed papers held down by rocks. Photographs were tacked to the slanted ceiling beams, dozens of them, some black and white, others faded color prints from what looked like the 70s and 80s. Maya moved closer, her phone trembling slightly in her grip. The photographs showed the lake, the surrounding cabins, and people. Lots of people. Some were candid shots taken from a distance, others appeared more deliberate. She recognized some of the locations, the dock where she'd sat that morning, the trail she'd walked yesterday, even her own cabin, though it looked different, newer. In the corner, a sleeping bag lay crumpled next to a pile of empty canned goods and water bottles. Someone had lived here, or at least spent considerable time here. Recently, judging by the freshness of some items compared to others. Maya's phone light swept across the papers on the makeshift desk. Newspaper clippings, she realized, some so old the paper had turned brown at the edges. The headlines made her stomach tighten. Local woman disappears during camping trip, search called off for missing hiker, third vanishing sparks police investigation. She leaned closer, her pregnant belly brushing against the crate. The dates spanned decades, the earliest from 1987, the most recent from just 2 years ago, all women. All in their 20s or 30s, all last seen near Pine Lake. "Oh God," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible in the cramped space. A loose floorboard beneath her feet shifted, and she looked down to see a corner of something poking out from underneath. She knelt carefully, her movements awkward, and pried up the board. Her phone's light illuminated a metal box, the kind used for storing important documents. Maya's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside were driver's licenses, credit cards, and jewelry, all bearing different women's names. Sarah Chen, Rebecca Martinez, Amanda Foster, names that matched some of the newspaper headlines. At the bottom of the box lay a leather journal, its cover worn smooth from handling. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. The handwriting was meticulous, obsessive. Dates, times, locations, observations about routines, habits, vulnerabilities. The entries read like a hunter's log, tracking prey. June 15th. Subject arrives alone, drives blue Honda. Parks in same spot as previous subjects. Predictable. June 18th. Morning routine established. Walks dock at 7 a.m., returns via North Trail. Isolated for approximately 45 minutes. June 21st, ready for approach. Weather favorable. No other cabins occupied this week? Maya flipped through more pages, finding similar patterns repeated with different subjects across different years. Her vision blurred as she realized what she was looking at, a predator's methodical documentation of his hunting ground. The most recent entries made her stomach drop. The handwriting was fresher, the ink darker. May 30th, new subject arrived. Pregnant, traveling alone, vulnerable, high-priority target. June 2nd, confirmed isolation. Husband deployed overseas. Subject exhibits trusting behavior, poor situational awareness. June 5th, weather delayed plans. Subject remains unaware of observation. Patience required. The dates were from just weeks ago, before she'd arrived. Someone had been planning this, planning for her, before she'd even known she was coming to the lake. Maya's breathing became rapid and shallow. The confined space suddenly felt suffocating. She needed to get out, needed to get away from this place immediately. But as she moved toward the opening, footsteps echoed from the cabin below. Heavy boots on wooden floors, deliberate, unhurried steps. Someone was in her cabin. Maya killed her phone's flashlight and froze in the darkness, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it could be heard through the floor. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. Below, the footsteps moved through the living room, paused at the kitchen, then headed toward the bedroom where she'd left the ladder, exposed, leading directly to where she now crouched in a killer's hidden lair. She was trapped 30 feet above the ground with nowhere to run, holding evidence of decades of murder, while a predator searched for her in the room below. The ladder creaked under Maya's weight as she climbed toward the hidden room, each rung protesting her ascent into the darkness above. The musty air grew thicker with every step, carrying scents of old wood and something else, something that made her stomach clench with unease. Her phone's flashlight beam swept across the cramped space as she pulled herself through the opening. The room was larger than she'd expected, stretching across most of the cabin's width, but the slanted roof forced her to crouch as she moved deeper inside. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny ghosts, disturbed for the first time in what must have been years. The first thing she noticed were the photographs. They covered the walls in meticulous rows, dozens of black and white images that seemed to watch her from every angle. Maya's breath caught as she realized what she was looking at. Surveillance photos of the cabin taken from various positions in the surrounding woods. Some showed the front porch in daylight, others captured the windows glowing warmly at night. All of them were recent enough to show the repairs she and David had made over the past few months. Someone had been watching them. Her hands trembling, Maya moved the light across more of the room's contents. A small table held what appeared to be detailed notes written in cramped handwriting, alongside maps of the local area marked with red circles and arrows. She picked up one of the notebooks, squinting to read the faded ink. Subject maintains routine. Morning walks at 7:15 a.m. Husband departs for town Tuesdays and Fridays. Vulnerability window 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays. The notebook slipped from Maya's fingers as the words sank in. These weren't old observations. The dates were from just 2 months ago. Someone had been studying their habits, learning their patterns, planning something. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her terror. Maya pressed her hand to her belly, trying to calm both herself and the child growing inside her. She needed to get David, needed to call the police, needed to get out of this horrible space. But something else caught her eye before she could turn back toward the ladder. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a support beam, sat an old wooden chest. Despite every instinct screaming at her to leave, Maya found herself crawling toward it. The latches were tarnished with age but opened easily under her touch. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, she found women's clothing. Not modern pieces, but dresses that looked like they belonged to another era entirely. Beneath the clothing lay newspaper clippings, their headlines bold and disturbing. Local woman still missing after 3 weeks. Search called off for vanished mother. Family loses hope in disappearance case. Maya's vision blurred as she read the dates, some from 5 years ago, others from 8, one particularly worn clipping from over a decade past. Different women, different years, but all sharing the same fate, all vanishing without a trace from this same area. The most recent clipping was dated just 6 months before Maya and David had moved to the cabin. A young woman named Sarah Chen, 26 years old, 7 months pregnant, had disappeared during what was supposed to be a weekend getaway with her husband. The photo showed a smiling woman with long dark hair and delicate features, features that bore an unsettling resemblance to Maya's own. At the bottom of the chest, her fingers found something that made her blood run cold. A birth certificate, crisp and new, filled out in that same cramped handwriting she'd seen in the notebooks. The mother's name was listed as Sarah Chen. The father's name had been scratched out violently, leaving deep gouges in the paper. But it was the child's name that made Maya's world tilt sideways. The baby was named Maya. A sound from below made her freeze, the cabin's front door opening with its familiar squeal of hinges. David's voice called out, cheerful and unsuspecting, "Maya? I'm back early." The hardware store was closed for some kind of emergency. She heard his footsteps moving through the cabin, coming closer to the bedroom where the ladder waited, where she crouched in terror among the evidence of something far worse than she'd ever imagined. The photographs on the walls seemed to press closer in her peripheral vision, and she realized with crystal clarity that whoever had taken those surveillance photos, whoever had collected those newspaper clippings, whoever had been planning and watching and waiting, they were still out there. And they weren't finished. Maya stuffed the birth certificate into her pocket and began crawling back toward the opening, her heart hammering against her ribs. Below, David's voice grew concerned as he called her name again. She had to get down, had to warn him, had to find a way to protect them both before whoever was responsible for this horror show returned to finish what they'd started. The baby kicked again, urgent and insistent, as if it too understood the danger they were all in. The morning light filtered through the cabin's windows as Maya sat at the kitchen table, the journals spread open before her. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. The elegant handwriting seemed to pulse with secrets, each entry revealing another layer of the mystery that had consumed her since finding the hidden room. June 15th, 1962. He came again last night. I can hear his footsteps on the porch, circling the cabin like a predator. The locks won't keep him out forever. I've hidden the evidence where no one will think to look. If something happens to me, I pray someone will find the truth. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. 6 months pregnant and living in isolation, she felt more vulnerable with each revelation. The journal belonged to someone named Catherine Winters, and the entries painted a picture of escalating terror that made Maya's skin crawl. A sharp knock at the door made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window she could see a sheriff's deputy standing on her porch, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. Maya quickly closed the journal and slipped it under a stack of mail before answering. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Deputy Harrison. Sorry to bother you so early, but I need to ask you a few questions about some vandalism reported in the area." Maya opened the door wider, studying his face. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, with earnest blue eyes and sandy hair. "Vandalism? I haven't seen anything unusual. Mind if I come in? Just for a minute." Something in his tone made her hesitate, but she stepped aside. He entered the cabin, his eyes immediately scanning the interior with professional thoroughness. "Nice place. You've been here what? About 3 weeks now?" 4 weeks. Maya remained standing near the door, ready to bolt if necessary. "What kind of vandalism are we talking about?" "Break-ins, mostly. Someone's been targeting empty cabins, looking for something specific." His gaze lingered on the kitchen table where the journal lay hidden. "You haven't noticed anyone hanging around? Maybe heard voices or footsteps at night?" The question hit too close to home. Maya had convinced herself the sounds she'd been hearing were just the old cabin settling, but now doubt crept in. "No, nothing like that." Deputy Harrison nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. He walked over to the kitchen window and peered out at the forest. This cabin has quite a history, you know. Previous owner disappeared back in the 60s, Catherine Winters. Never did find out what happened to her. Maya's blood turned to ice. She fought to keep her voice steady. Disappeared. Vanished without a trace. Left everything behind. Clothes, jewelry, even her car. Some folks thought she ran off with a lover, but her sister insisted something terrible had happened. Said Catherine had been receiving threatening letters, that someone was stalking her. He turned back to Maya, watching her reaction carefully. You sure you haven't found anything unusual around here? Sometimes old places like this hold on to their secrets. The weight of the journal under the mail felt enormous. Maya forced herself to shake her head. Nothing at all. Well, if you do come across anything, or if you notice anyone suspicious, give us a call right away. A woman alone out here. He let the sentence hang in the air like a threat. After he left, Maya waited until his patrol car disappeared down the dirt road before rushing back to the journal. She flipped through the pages with trembling fingers, searching for more details about the threats Catherine had received. July 2nd, 1962, found another letter slipped under my door. The words are cut from magazines like something out of a horror movie. You can't hide forever. He knows I have proof of what he did. The question is whether I'll live long enough to use it. July 8th, 1962, heard scratching in the walls again last night. Not mice this time. Someone was trying to get into the space above the ceiling. Thank God I moved everything to the new hiding spot. If he finds the photographs. Maya's pulse quickened. Photographs. She thought about the metal box she'd glimpsed in the hidden room but hadn't fully explored. Whatever Catherine had discovered, whatever evidence she'd gathered, it might still be up there. The baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her mother's agitation. Maya placed both hands on her belly, torn between the need to know the truth and the instinct to protect her unborn child. But Deputy Harrison's visit had made one thing clear. Whoever had threatened Catherine might still be out there, still searching for what she'd hidden. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Maya made her decision. She would return to the hidden room tonight when darkness would conceal her movements. The truth about Catherine Winters was calling to her from above, and despite every rational warning screaming in her head, Maya knew she had to answer. The past had already found her. Now she needed to face it head-on. The dusty journals lay spread across Maya's kitchen table like archaeological specimens, their yellowed pages releasing the musty scent of decades past. She'd been reading for 3 hours straight, her pregnancy making her back ache from hunching over the cramped handwriting, but she couldn't stop. Each entry pulled her deeper into a world that had existed right above her head, unknown and undisturbed until yesterday. The journals belonged to someone named Catherine Morse, and they spanned from 1987 to 1991. The early entries were mundane. Complaints about the isolation, descriptions of harsh winters, mentions of a husband named Robert who worked long hours at something called the facility. But as Maya progressed through the months, Catherine's tone shifted from lonely housewife to something approaching desperation. October 15th, 1989. Robert came home with blood on his shirt again. Says it's from the deer they're processing, but deer season doesn't start for another month. When I asked him about it, he got that look. The one that makes me want to disappear into the walls. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby had been active all morning, as if sensing her tension. She flipped ahead several pages, searching for answers. November 3rd, 1989. Found the photos. God help me, I found them. Hidden in his toolbox like some sick treasure. Those poor girls. I recognized 2 of them from the missing person reports on the news. Sarah Chen, Rebecca Martinez. The others, I don't know their names, but I know their faces now. I know what Robert has been doing. The journal trembled in Maya's hands. She set it down and walked to the window, needing air, needing space. The forest stretched endlessly before her, the same trees that Catherine Morse had stared at 30 years ago while living with a monster. Maya's phone buzzed, a text from David asking if she needed anything from town. She started to type a response, then stopped. How could she explain this? How could she tell him that their peaceful retreat might be built on a foundation of murder? She returned to the table and picked up another journal, this one from 1990. Catherine's handwriting had deteriorated, becoming sharp and erratic. January 8th, 1990. I tried to leave, got as far as the main road before Robert found me. He was calm about it, which somehow made it worse. Told me I was his wife, that wives don't abandon their husbands. Told me about the others who tried to run. I think he meant the girls. I think he was telling me what happens to women who don't stay where they belong. Maya felt bile rise in her throat. She pushed the journal away and grabbed her laptop, searching for any news reports from that time period. Missing persons cases from the late 80s and early 90s filled her screen. Sarah Chen, 18, vanished while hiking near the state forest. Rebecca Martinez, 22, disappeared from a gas station 40 miles from Maya's cabin. Jennifer Walsh, 19, last seen leaving her job at a local diner. The faces stared back at her from decades-old photos. Young women with their whole lives ahead of them, their futures stolen by someone who had lived in this very cabin. Maya's sanctuary had been a predator's hunting lodge. Her phone rang, startling her. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "You sound weird. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just tired." The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter. She couldn't tell him, not yet, not until she understood what she was dealing with. "I'm picking up groceries. Need anything special?" "Just the usual." She paused, looking back at the journals. "Actually, David, maybe we should think about going back to the city soon. I'm getting a little stir-crazy out here." Silence on the other end. Then, "Maya, we just got there. The baby's not due for 3 months. I thought you loved it there." "I do. Is this about the stress Dr. Rodriguez mentioned? Because isolation is exactly what she recommended. No city noise, no pollution, just peace and quiet for you and the baby." Peace and quiet. If only he knew. Maya closed her eyes, feeling trapped between the horror of the past and David's well-meaning concern for their future. "We'll talk when you get back," she said finally. After hanging up, Maya returned to Catherine's final journal. The entries became sporadic, then stopped altogether in March 1991. The last entry was a single line, "He knows I know." "God forgive me, but I can't let him add me to his collection." Maya searched online for Catherine and Robert Morse, but found nothing. No death certificates, no missing person reports, no trace of what had happened to either of them. It was as if they had simply vanished, leaving only their secrets hidden in the ceiling above. The baby kicked hard, as if trying to warn her. Maya looked up at the ceiling, knowing the hidden room was still there, still holding its mysteries. And somewhere in those shadows might be the key to understanding not just what Robert Morse had done, but what had happened to his wife, and whether their story was truly over. Maya's hands trembled as she spread the photographs across her kitchen table like tarot cards, promising nothing but misfortune. Each image showed the same woman from different angles, laughing at what appeared to be a town festival, standing beside a red pickup truck, walking hand in hand with a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out in black ink. The woman looked exactly like Maya. Not similar, not reminiscent. Exactly like her, down to the small scar above her left eyebrow and the distinctive way her hair fell in waves past her shoulders. It was as if Maya had posed for these photographs herself, except they were clearly decades old, judging by the faded colors and the vintage clothing. She picked up one particular photo, the woman standing in front of Maya's own cabin, but the porch looked different, painted white instead of the current blue. A date was scrawled on the back in faded pencil, June 1987. Maya had been born in 1992. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, making her gasp. She pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling an inexplicable chill despite the warm afternoon. "I know, little one," she whispered. "This is impossible." Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "How are you feeling? Still planning to come home next week?" She stared at the message, then at the photographs, then back at her phone. How could she explain this? How could she tell him that she'd found pictures of herself from before she was born, hidden in a secret room above their rental cabin? He'd think the isolation had finally gotten to her, that pregnancy hormones had pushed her over the edge. Instead, she typed back, feeling better. Might stay another few days to finish the project. The lie came easier than it should have. Maya gathered the photos and headed back upstairs, her movements awkward as she navigated the ladder to the hidden room. The late afternoon sun slanted through the small window, casting everything in amber light that made the dust motes dance like spirits. She examined the walls more carefully this time, running her fingers along the rough wooden planks. Behind the old trunk, she discovered something she'd missed before, letters carved directly into the wood. They were crude, as if scratched with a nail or knife. They took her. Below that, in different handwriting, find the truth. And at the bottom, barely visible, protect the baby. Maya's blood turned to ice water. She sat heavily on the floor, photos scattered around her like fallen leaves. The carved words seemed to pulse in the golden light, and she had the strangest sensation that whoever had written them was still watching, still waiting. A sound from downstairs made her freeze, the distinctive creak of the front door opening. She held her breath, listening. Footsteps crossed the living room, slow and deliberate. "Hello?" a man's voice called. "Maya? Your car's outside, so I know you're here." She didn't recognize the voice, but something about its casual familiarity sent warning bells clanging in her head. Maya quickly gathered the photos, shoving them into her jacket pocket, and moved as quietly as possible toward the ladder. "Maya, we need to talk." The voice was closer now, at the bottom of the stairs. "I know you found the room. I've been watching the cabin." Her heart hammered against her ribs. The baby seemed to sense her fear, moving restlessly inside her. Maya pressed herself against the wall, praying the floor wouldn't creak and give her away. "You look just like her, you know," the man continued, his footsteps now on the stairs. "It's remarkable, really. Genetics are fascinating things. Did you know that sometimes traits can skip not just generations, but entire family lines? They lie dormant, waiting for just the right circumstances to emerge." Maya's throat constricted. He was talking as if he knew her, knew about her family, but she'd never seen this place before 6 weeks ago, had no connection to this remote corner of Oregon except for the rental agreement David had found online. Sarah thought she could hide what she knew, the voice said, now definitely on the second floor. Thought she could disappear and take her secrets with her. But secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? Especially when they're carried in the blood. Sarah, the woman in the photographs. Maya heard him moving through the bedrooms, checking each one methodically. She pressed her back against the wall beside the hidden entrance, hoping he wouldn't notice the slight gap where the panel didn't quite align with the ceiling. "I know you can hear me, Maya, and I know you've seen the pictures. The question is, what are you going to do with what you've learned? Because some knowledge comes with a price, and sometimes that price gets passed down from mother to child." The footsteps stopped directly below her hiding place, just like Sarah learned 37 years ago. Maya's hands trembled as she dialed Detective Chen's number, the journal still open beside her on the kitchen table. The morning light streaming through the windows felt harsh against the horrific words she'd just read. Detective Chen speaking. "It's Maya Richardson. I found something else in the room, a journal from 1987. I think—" her voice caught. "I think I know what happened to the missing woman." 20 minutes later, Chen's sedan pulled into her driveway. Maya watched him approach through the window, noting how his usual casual demeanor had shifted into something more focused, more urgent. She opened the door before he could knock. "Show me," he said simply. Maya led him up to the hidden room, the ladder creaking under their combined weight. Chen swept his flashlight across the space methodically, taking in the shrine-like arrangement of photographs and newspaper clippings she'd discovered yesterday. "The journal was hidden behind this loose board," Maya explained, pointing to the wall panel she'd pried open. "It belonged to someone named Harold Brennan. He was—" Obsessed with Sarah Chen, Detective Chen froze. Chen. What was her full name? Maya consulted the journal. Sarah Chen Morrison. She was married, had a daughter. She looked up at the detective's pale face. Why? Do you recognize the name? Chen lowered his flashlight, his breathing shallow. Sarah Chen Morrison was my aunt. She disappeared when I was 12 years old. His voice was barely a whisper. She was my father's sister. The family never found out what happened to her. The revelation hung between them like a live wire. Maya felt the baby shift restlessly in her womb, as if sensing the electricity in the air. That's why you were so interested in this case, Maya said, understanding flooding through her. It wasn't just about helping me. I've been looking for answers about Sarah for 20 years, Chen admitted. When you called about finding women's belongings in a hidden room, and this address, I knew this was the area where she was last seen, but I never imagined. He gestured helplessly at the photographs covering the walls. Maya handed him the journal. Harold Brennan was living in this cabin. He'd been watching Sarah following her daily routines, taking pictures without her knowledge. The entries get more disturbing as they go on. Chen flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with each entry. Jesus Christ! He details everything. Her schedule, where she shopped, when she picked up her daughter from school. He looked up sharply. Where's the rest of it? This can't be everything. I haven't found anything else yet, but there might be more hidden panels. They spent the next hour systematically examining every surface in the room. Chen worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd been waiting half his life for answers. Behind a second loose board, Maya discovered a metal box containing more photographs. These were different, darker. They showed Sarah looking frightened, glancing over her shoulder, clearly aware she was being watched. The last journal entry, Chen said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. It's dated October 15th, 1987. He says he's going to make his move that evening. That's the night she disappeared. Maya sank onto the dusty floor, one hand on her belly. There's something else. The current owner of this cabin, Marcus Webb, I looked him up yesterday. He's related to Harold Brennan, his nephew. Chen's head snapped up. Webb knew about this room? He had to. When I rented this place, he specifically told me to stay out of the attic, said it was structurally unsafe. But look around. This room is solid as a rock. We need to find Webb, now. Chen was already moving toward the ladder. And we need to get you somewhere safe. Safe? Why would I? Maya, think about it. You discovered a room that contains evidence of a murder. The property owner is related to the killer and has been actively hiding this evidence for decades. You've stumbled onto something that could destroy his life. The implications hit her like a physical blow. He knows I found the room. When I called him yesterday asking questions about Harold Brennan, he got defensive, evasive. What exactly did you tell him? That I'd found some old belongings and was curious about previous tenants. Maya struggled to her feet, panic beginning to claw at her throat. But Chen, if he thinks I know too much, we're leaving, right now. They climbed down from the room quickly, Chen already on his radio calling for backup units to search the property more thoroughly. As Maya gathered essential items from the bedroom, she heard a car engine outside. Chen appeared in the doorway, his service weapon drawn. That's not my backup, he said quietly. Get down and stay away from the windows. Through a crack in the bedroom curtains, Maya glimpsed a familiar blue truck in her driveway. Marcus Webb sat behind the wheel, but he wasn't getting out. He was just watching the house, and even from this distance, Maya could see something dark and calculating in his posture. The past had finally caught up with her cabin, and it wasn't finished claiming victims. The beam of Maya's flashlight cut through the dusty air of the hidden room, revealing details she'd missed in her initial shock. What she'd first taken for scattered papers were actually carefully arranged documents, photographs, and maps spread across a makeshift desk fashioned from old crates. Someone had spent considerable time up here, methodically organizing what appeared to be evidence. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly as she approached the desk, her baby responding to her elevated heart rate with gentle kicks. The largest photograph showed the cabin as it had been decades ago, surrounded by towering pines that had since been cleared. A red circle had been drawn around a spot near the back porch, where Maya now kept her herb garden. Beneath the photograph lay a hand-drawn map of the property, dotted with X's and notations in faded blue ink. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Someone had documented these locations with scientific precision. Maya squinted at the notes. Disturbed Earth, June 1987. Unusual settling north corner. Metal detector positive, 3 feet down. Her breath caught. Someone had been searching for something buried on her property. A manila folder contained newspaper clippings, their edges yellowed with age. The headlines made Maya's stomach lurch. Local woman disappears without trace. Search continues for missing mother. Police investigation stalls in vanishing case. The articles were from 1987, featuring a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and Maya's exact shade of auburn hair. Catherine Brennan, age 24, 3 months pregnant when she disappeared. Maya sank onto an overturned crate, her legs suddenly unsteady. The resemblance was unmistakable. They could have been sisters, the same delicate features, the same determined set to the jaw. Even their stories echoed each other, pregnant, alone, seeking refuge in this remote place. The folder contained more articles spanning several years, documenting the failed investigation and the family's desperate search for answers. Catherine's mother had hired private investigators, offered rewards, and eventually died, still wondering what had happened to her daughter. The trail had gone completely cold until 1995, when someone, the room's secretive occupant, had apparently taken up the investigation. Maya found a leather journal wedged behind the photograph display. The first entry was dated 8 years ago, written in the same careful handwriting as the map notations. Moved into the Brennan cabin today. Owner claims no knowledge of the disappearance, but locals remember. Mrs. Henderson across the valley saw lights here the night Catherine vanished, though police reports show the cabin was supposedly empty. Something doesn't add up. The journal entries continued chronologically, documenting interviews with elderly neighbors, searches of public records, and increasingly desperate attempts to piece together Catherine's final days. The writer had been thorough, methodical, and utterly convinced that the answers lay somewhere on this property. Found her car registration in courthouse records, blue Honda Civic, license plate documented but vehicle never recovered. If she drove here, where did the car go? Creek runs deep behind the property, worth investigating. Maya's hands trembled as she read entry after entry. The journal's author had been living directly below her, in her cabin, searching for a woman who disappeared while carrying a child. The parallels were too stark to ignore, too deliberate to be coincidence. The final entry was dated only 3 months ago, just before Maya had signed her lease. New tenant incoming. Pregnant, alone, matches Catherine's description remarkably. This cannot be random. Someone is using this place, drawing them here. Must maintain surveillance from above. The pattern is repeating. Maya's blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching her, documenting her movements, waiting for something to happen. She fumbled through the remaining papers with mounting panic, finding detailed notes about her daily routines, her medical appointments, even her grocery shopping schedule. A loose photograph fluttered to the floor, a recent image of Maya tending her garden, taken from the tree line behind the cabin. On the back, someone had written, "Same spot, same condition, same danger." The sound of gravel crunching in her driveway made Maya freeze. A car door slammed, then footsteps approached the cabin. She clicked off her flashlight and crouched in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Maya?" a man's voice called from below. "I saw your lights. Everything okay?" She didn't recognize the voice, couldn't place it among her few local acquaintances. The footsteps circled the cabin's exterior, pausing at each window, testing the doors. Maya pressed her back against the wall, trying to control her breathing. The baby kicked frantically, sensing her distress. She clutched the journal to her chest, understanding now that Catherine Brennan's disappearance wasn't just history, it was a template. The footsteps stopped directly below her hiding spot. "I know you found the room, Maya." The voice was calm, almost gentle. "We need to talk." Maya closed her eyes, finally understanding why the cabin's rent had been so reasonable, why the lease had been processed so quickly. She hadn't found this place by accident. She'd been led here. The ladder creaked under Maya's weight as she descended from the secret room, her mind reeling from what she'd discovered, the photograph of Sarah Whitmore clutching a baby, her baby, burned in her memory. 23 years old, the same age Maya was now, the same desperate look in her eyes that Maya had seen in her own mirror lately. She pulled the ceiling panel closed and moved the chair back to its original position, her hands trembling. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Sarah had been pregnant when she disappeared, and now Maya, carrying her own child, had stumbled upon this hidden truth. Her phone buzzed. A text from David, working late again. "Don't wait up." The familiar pang of loneliness hit her, but tonight it felt different, more urgent. She needed to tell someone about what she'd found, but David had been so distant lately, so consumed with his cases. Would he even believe her? Maya made herself tea and sat at the kitchen table, spreading out copies of the documents she'd photographed. The birth certificate was the most disturbing piece. Baby Whitmore, born December 15th, 1999, father listed as unknown. But there was something else, a medical notation in the margin that made her blood run cold. High-risk pregnancy. Complications noted. She touched her belly instinctively. Her own pregnancy had been labeled high risk due to her age and some irregular test results. The parallels were becoming impossible to ignore. A knock at the door made her jump. Through the window, she saw Sheriff Coleman's patrol car in her driveway, its headlights cutting through the evening darkness. Maya quickly gathered the papers and shoved them into a kitchen drawer before answering the door. "Evening, Mrs. Chen. Hope I'm not disturbing you." Coleman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in, see how you're settling in." "That's very kind of you, Sheriff." "I'm doing well, thank you." He peered past her into the cabin. "Your husband not home?" "He's working late." Maya kept her hand on the door, not inviting him in. Something about his presence made her uneasy. "Ah, yes, the lawyer. Important work, I'm sure." Coleman stepped closer to the threshold. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about Sarah Whitmore." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "Oh?" "It occurred to me that I might have been too quick to dismiss your curiosity. Sometimes fresh eyes see things we locals miss." His gaze was penetrating. "Have you remembered anything else about why her name seemed familiar?" The lie came easily. "No, nothing. I think I was just tired." Coleman nodded slowly. "Pregnancy can do that, make the mind play tricks." He paused. "Sarah was pregnant too, you know, when she left town." Maya fought to keep her expression neutral. "I didn't know that." Most people didn't. The family kept it quiet. Shame back then. His eyes never left her face. Strange how history has a way of repeating itself, isn't it? A chill ran down Maya's spine. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Young pregnant women, alone in this cabin. Both of you arrived here under, let's say, stressful circumstances." Coleman's smile turned cold. "Sarah was running from something too." "I'm not running from anything, Sheriff." "Course not." He stepped back. "Well, I should let you get your rest. Growing a baby is hard work." He paused at the edge of the porch. "Mrs. Chen, if you do remember anything else about Sarah, or if you find anything unusual around the property, you'll call me right away, won't you?" "Naturally." Maya watched him drive away, waiting until his taillights disappeared before closing and locking the door. Her hands shook as she retrieved the papers from the drawer. Coleman knew more than he was letting on. The way he'd spoken about Sarah, the pointed references to pregnancy, the emphasis on calling him if she found anything. It felt like a warning. She needed to talk to Eleanor Whitmore, but not here. not where Coleman might be watching. Maya grabbed her jacket and car keys. The drive to town took 15 minutes, long enough for her to rehearse what she'd say. Eleanor lived in a small Victorian house on Maple Street, according to the address Maya had found in the phone book. The porch light was on, and Eleanor answered the door in a faded floral housecoat, her grey hair in curlers. "Mrs. Chen, what brings you here so late?" Maya took a breath. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you about Sarah, about what really happened to her." Eleanor's face went pale. She glanced nervously up and down the street before stepping aside. "Come in, quickly." The living room was cluttered with old furniture and family photographs. Eleanor gestured for Maya to sit, then moved to close the curtains. "You found something, didn't you?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "In that cabin." Maya nodded. The room above the ceiling. Sarah's room. Eleanor closed her eyes, as if she'd been dreading this moment for years. "I was afraid someone would eventually find it." The wind howled through the trees as Maya pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient pine, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the darkness she could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the forest floor, searching, getting closer. She'd barely made it out of the cabin before they arrived. The crunch of gravel under tires had given her just enough warning to slip through the back door and into the woods, clutching the diary and photographs against her chest like a shield. Now, 20 minutes later, she was lost in the wilderness with nowhere to go and no idea who was hunting her. The beam passed dangerously close, illuminating the trunk just inches from her face. Maya held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the danger, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. "She's not in the house," a man's voice called out, rough and unfamiliar. "Check the shed. Car's still here," another voice responded from the direction of the cabin. "She can't have gone far." Maya's mind raced. How had they known she'd found the room? She'd been so careful, hadn't told anyone except... A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold mountain air. Had someone been watching her? Listening? The flashlight beam swept past again, and Maya forced herself to move deeper into the woods. Each step felt treacherous in the darkness, roots and fallen branches threatening to send her tumbling. She couldn't afford to fall, not with the baby, not when she was finally so close to the truth about what had happened to Sarah Whitmore. A branch snapped behind her, too close. Maya froze, every muscle tensed. The forest had gone eerily quiet, as if holding its breath along with her. Even the wind had died down to an ominous whisper through the pines. "I know you're out there," the first man called, his voice carrying easily through the still air. "We just want to talk, Maya. No need to make this harder than it has to be." The use of her name sent ice through her veins. This wasn't random. They knew exactly who she was, which meant they knew she'd found something they wanted to keep buried. Maya clutched the diary tighter. Sarah's final entries painted a picture of a young woman who'd stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen, something involving the original owners of the land, the Blackwood Mining Company, and a cover-up that had cost her life. The photographs showed documents, financial records, evidence of environmental crimes that would have destroyed the company if they'd come to light in 1987. But Sarah had never gotten the chance to expose them. She'd disappeared, and the official story had been that she'd run off with a boyfriend. Only the diary told the real truth, that she'd been murdered for what she'd discovered, her body hidden somewhere on the property that had eventually become Maya's sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come here to find peace, to prepare for her new life as a mother, only to uncover a grave that someone was still willing to kill to protect. A twig snapped to her left, then another to her right. They were surrounding her, moving through the forest with practiced precision. Maya's breathing quickened, panic clawing at her throat. She needed to get out of here, needed to get to town where there would be witnesses, safety, but first, she needed to hide the evidence. Moving as quietly as she could, Maya found a large boulder nestled between two trees. She felt around its base until her fingers found a small gap, just wide enough to slide the diary and photographs inside. If something happened to her, if they found her, at least Sarah's story might survive. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya winced. The stress couldn't be good for either of them. She had to think, had to find a way out of this that didn't end with her becoming another disappeared woman. Another unsolved mystery. The sound of footsteps grew closer, deliberate and unhurried. They knew she was trapped, knew these woods better than she did. But Maya had something they didn't expect, desperation and a mother's fierce need to protect her unborn child. She picked up a fallen branch, testing its weight. Not much of a weapon, but it would have to do. Then she began moving again, not away from the cabin this time, but in a wide circle around it. If she could get back to her car, get to the main road. A hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. Maya spun around, swinging the branch with all her strength. It connected with something solid, and she heard a grunt of pain, a muttered curse. She didn't wait to see the damage, just ran, crashing through the underbrush with abandon now that stealth was impossible. Behind her, she could hear pursuit, voices calling to each other, coordinating. But ahead, through the trees, she could see the faint outline of the cabin against the star-filled sky. Almost there, almost safe. That's when the second man stepped out from behind the woodshed, blocking her path. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke as Maya descended from the attic, each thunderclap making her jump despite her attempts to stay calm. Rain hammered against the cabin's windows with increasing intensity, and she realized with growing dread that leaving tonight wasn't an option. The mountain roads would be treacherous, possibly impassable. She clutched the photograph tighter, studying the faces in the dim light of the living room. The woman's resemblance to herself was undeniable now that she looked closer. The same dark hair, the same stubborn jawline, even the same way of holding her shoulders slightly raised when tense. But it was the man's face that sent ice through her veins. She'd seen those eyes before, that cruel smile. Thomas Brennan. The name from the deed, the man who'd supposedly sold this property to her grandmother decades ago. But if this photo was any indication, he'd been far more than a simple land transaction. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Everything okay? Haven't heard from you since your appointment. Call if you need anything." She started to type a response when another sound made her freeze. Footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, deliberate steps that couldn't be explained by the storm. Her blood turned to ice as she remembered she'd never actually checked if she'd locked the door after David left. The footsteps stopped directly outside. Maya held her breath, praying it was just a tree branch or debris blown by the wind. Then came the slow, testing rattle of the door handle. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the kitchen where she'd left her car keys, but a loose floorboard betrayed her with a loud creak. The rattling stopped immediately. "Maya?" The voice was muffled by the storm, but unmistakably male. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." She didn't recognize the voice, which somehow made it worse. At least with David, she'd known what she was dealing with. This was a complete unknown. "I don't want any trouble," she called out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Just leave me alone." A low chuckle drifted through the door. "You found the room, didn't you? Found the photos, the documents. You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby kicked, as if sensing her fear. She needed to think, needed to find another way out. The back door was an option, but it would mean running into the woods during a storm while 6 months pregnant. The thought terrified her almost as much as whoever was outside. "Your grandmother was a smart woman," the voice continued conversationally. "She knew when to keep her mouth shut. Kept that room sealed up tight for 40 years, never said a word to anyone. But you just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" The pieces were starting to fall into place with horrible clarity. Her grandmother hadn't just inherited this cabin. She'd been involved in whatever had happened here. The sealed room, the hidden documents, the way she'd always deflected questions about the family history. It hadn't been shame or trauma that kept her silent. It had been fear. "What do you want?" Maya called out, moving slowly toward the kitchen. If she could reach the back door while keeping him talking. The same thing we wanted from Eleanor. Silence. But she's gone now, and you're asking too many questions, stirring up things that should stay buried. Lightning illuminated the cabin for a split second, and Maya caught a glimpse of a shadow moving past the window. He was circling the house, checking for other entrances. Her time was running out. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter with one hand and her phone with the other, quickly dialing 911. But the call wouldn't connect. The storm had knocked out the cell towers, or he'd somehow jammed the signal. The shadow passed by the kitchen window, and Maya ducked below the sill, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she had to bite back a gasp of pain. "I found your car keys," the voice sang out mockingly from somewhere near the back of the house. "Left them right there on the kitchen counter. Not very careful of you." Maya's blood ran cold. He'd been inside, while she was in the attic. While she was reading those documents, he'd been here, watching, waiting. The violation of it made her stomach churn. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to think of any weapon, any escape route she might have missed. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and she was completely cut off from any help. Then she remembered the loose floorboard in the hallway, the one that had just betrayed her location. If the cabin was old enough to have hidden rooms, maybe it had other secrets, other ways out. The back door handle began to rattle, and Maya knew her time had run out entirely. Maya's hands trembled as she clutched the photograph, the faces staring back at her like ghosts demanding recognition. The woman in the center bore an unmistakable resemblance to herself, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline. But it was the man standing beside her that made Maya's blood run cold. She'd seen that face before, weathered by decades, but unmistakably the same. Harold Brennan, her landlord. The baby kicked violently, as if sensing her distress. Maya pressed her palm against her belly, trying to steady her breathing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture she didn't want to see. The secret room, the hidden photographs, Harold's insistence that she rent this particular cabin. None of it was coincidence. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Maya froze, listening. She'd locked the door, hadn't she? The sound came again, deliberate and heavy. Someone was inside the cabin. "Maya?" Harold's voice drifted up from below, friendly and concerned. "I saw your light on. Everything all right up there?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. The photographs scattered around her suddenly felt like evidence of a crime she'd stumbled into. She quickly gathered them up, shoving them back into the box along with the letters she hadn't had time to read. "I'm fine," she called back, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Just getting ready for bed." Door was unlocked. "You really should be more careful, especially in your condition." Maya knew she'd locked that door. She always did, which meant Harold had a key. Of course he did. He owned the place. But the realization that he could come and go as he pleased made her skin crawl. She heard his footsteps moving through the living room, slow and deliberate. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if picking up on her fear. "These old cabins can be tricky," Harold continued, his voice closer now. He was at the bottom of the stairs. "Sometimes you think you've locked something, but it doesn't quite catch. Mind if I take a look at that latch for you?" Maya's eyes darted to the ceiling panel above her head. She'd replaced it carefully, but would he notice it had been disturbed? The box of photographs sat heavy in her lap, damning evidence of her discovery. "That's really not necessary," she said. "I'm sure it's fine." But his footsteps were already on the stairs, each creak announcing his approach. Maya shoved the box under her bed and grabbed a book from her nightstand, arranging herself casually against the pillows just as Harold's head appeared in the stairwell. He looked older than she remembered, his face deeply lined and his hair white as snow. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had seemed so kind when she'd first met him, now held something else entirely, a calculating coldness that made her want to pull the covers up to her chin like a frightened child. "There you are," he said, stepping into the loft space. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the ceiling above her bed. "Cozy up here, isn't it? Perfect for a young mother to be." It suits my needs, Maya said carefully. She kept the book open in front of her, hoping he couldn't see how badly her hands were shaking. Harold moved closer, and she caught the scent of tobacco and something else, something medicinal and sharp. You know, your grandmother used to love this loft too. Said it made her feel safe, being up high where she could see everything. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mouth suddenly dry. My grandmother? Oh, yes, Harold said, settling into the chair by her dresser as if he belonged there. Sarah was a lovely woman, stubborn as hell, just like you appear to be. She lived here for almost a year before... He trailed off, shaking his head sadly. Maya's mind raced. Sarah, the woman in the photographs, that had to be her grandmother. But that meant... Before what? She whispered. Before she died, of course. Such a tragedy. So young, and with a baby on the way too. His eyes fixed on Maya's rounded belly. History has a funny way of repeating itself, doesn't it? The baby gave another violent kick, and Maya had to bite back a gasp. Everything about this conversation felt wrong, like walking across ice that was about to give way beneath her feet. I should get some rest, she said, closing the book. The baby's been active today. Of course, Harold said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he leaned back in the chair, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You look so much like her, you know. Sarah. It's remarkable, really, almost like she's come back to finish what she started. Maya pulled the blanket higher, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. What did she start? Harold smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, the expression didn't reach his eyes. The floorboards creaked beneath Maya's feet as she descended from the secret room, clutching the leather journal against her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by the terrible knowledge she now carried. Sarah Whitmore's final entries painted a picture so horrifying that Maya's hands trembled as she made her way to the kitchen table. She spread the journal open under the lamplight, her eyes scanning the increasingly erratic handwriting. The dates jumped around. Sometimes Sarah had written multiple entries in a single day, other times weeks passed between notations, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone had been watching her, following her, leaving subtle signs that they knew exactly where she was. November 15th. Found my kitchen window open again. I know I locked it. The coffee cup was moved. He's been inside. November 18th. Dr. Henley says, I'm imagining things, that pregnancy hormones can cause paranoia. But I know what I know. The photographs on my dresser were rearranged. Someone touched my things. November 23rd. Can't sleep. Every sound outside makes me jump. Found footprints in the snow around the cabin this morning. Size 11 boots, same tread pattern I've seen before. He's getting bolder. Maya's breath caught as she read the next entry, dated just 3 days before Sarah's death. November 2006. I know who it is now. Saw him watching from the tree line when I came back from town. Robert Morrison. I should have known. Should have realized when he started asking all those questions about Tom, about when I'd be alone. He thinks I don't remember what he did to that girl in Millbrook, but I do. I remember everything. The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Robert Morrison. The same man who'd sold her the cabin, who'd been so helpful, so concerned about her living alone. The same man who'd offered to check on her, who knew her schedule, who had keys. Her phone buzzed against the table, making her jump. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. Beautiful night for a walk. You should get some fresh air. Maya's blood turned to ice. She rushed to the window, peering through the curtains into the darkness beyond. The forest was a wall of black, impenetrable shadows dancing in the wind. But somewhere out there she knew he was watching. Another text, the baby's room in the attic would make a perfect nursery, don't you think? So quiet up there, so private. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal. She tried again, moving around the cabin, holding the phone high, but the bars remained stubbornly absent. The landline was dead too. She'd noticed it earlier but hadn't thought much of it. Now she realized it wasn't a coincidence. A soft scraping sound came from overhead, directly above the kitchen. Maya froze, listening. There it was again, deliberate, measured. Footsteps in the attic. He was already inside. Maya grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen drawer and backed toward the front door, but as her hand touched the deadbolt, she heard it. A low whistle. The same tune she'd heard that first night. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the door. Trapped between the intruder above and whatever waited outside, Maya made a desperate choice. She killed the lights and crept toward the back of the cabin, toward the small bathroom window she remembered from her first inspection of the place. It was narrow, but she might be able to squeeze through. The footsteps above grew louder, more confident. He knew she was listening. This was part of the game, part of the terror he wanted her to feel. Just like Sarah. Maya eased the bathroom window open, grateful when it moved silently. The frame was tight, but she managed to work her shoulders through, then her growing belly. The drop to the ground was further than she'd expected, and she landed hard, biting back a cry of pain as her ankle twisted. Behind her, she heard the front door of the cabin open with a key. "Maya?" Robert Morrison's voice called out, sickeningly gentle. "I know you're here, sweetheart. I brought you something. Something that belonged to Sarah. I think you'll find it very interesting." She limped toward the forest, each step sending shoots of pain up her leg. The darkness was absolute under the canopy of trees, but she pressed forward, guided only by instinct and desperation. "You can't run far in your condition," his voice carried through the night air. "I'm not going to hurt you, Maya, or the baby. I just want to take care of you both, the way I wanted to take care of Sarah." Maya bit down on her lip to keep from sobbing. She could hear him now, moving through the underbrush behind her, his flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. He was taking his time, confident in his ability to track her down. The journal's final entry flashed through her mind. "He's coming tonight. I can feel it. If something happens to me, if they find me like the others, look for the truth in the walls. He keeps trophies." Maya pressed deeper into the forest, her unborn child the only thing keeping her moving forward through the pain and terror. Sarah Whitmore's voice seemed to whisper through the trees, "Run." The basement smelled of damp earth and something else, something that made Maya's skin crawl. Detective Reeves swept his flashlight across the concrete walls while Maya stayed close behind him, one hand protectively cradling her belly. The wooden stairs creaked ominously above them as Tom descended, his face pale in the harsh beam of light. "There," Maya whispered, pointing toward the far corner where shadows seemed to cluster unnaturally. "Behind those old paint cans." Reeves approached cautiously, his weapon drawn but lowered. The paint cans were ancient, their labels faded and peeling, arranged in a careful line that looked too deliberate to be random. Behind them, barely visible in the gloom, was what appeared to be a small door set into the foundation wall. "How did you even find this?" Tom asked, his voice strained. Maya didn't answer immediately. She couldn't explain the compulsion that had driven her down here 3 days ago, the same inexplicable pull she'd felt when she discovered the room above their bedroom ceiling. It was as if the cabin itself was trying to tell her something, revealing its secrets piece by piece. Reeves moved the paint cans aside with careful precision, photographing their placement first. The door was smaller than Maya had expected, more like a cabinet door, really, with a simple latch that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Rust flaked away as the detective opened it. The beam of his flashlight revealed a cramped space, maybe 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Wooden shelves lined the walls, and on those shelves sat dozens of mason jars filled with what looked like murky water. But as Reeves stepped closer, the contents became horrifyingly clear. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, his professional composure cracking for the first time since Maya had known him. The jars contained specimens, small, preserved things floating in formaldehyde or some similar solution. Maya's medical training kicked in despite her revulsion, and she recognized what she was seeing: fetal tissue, specimens at various stages of development, each jar meticulously labeled with dates spanning nearly 40 years. "Get her out of here!" Reeves snapped at Tom, but Maya was already backing away, her hand pressed to her mouth. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about Sarah Whitmore's disappearance anymore. This was something far worse, far more extensive. Tom's arm came around her shoulders, guiding her toward the stairs, but she resisted. "The labels," she managed to say. "Did you see the labels?" Reeves was already photographing them, his camera flash strobing across the macabre collection. "We'll document everything. You don't need to see any more of this." But Maya had already seen enough. The dates on the nearest jars started in 1985, 2 years before Sarah disappeared, and they continued with disturbing regularity almost to the present day. The most recent jar bore a date from just 6 months ago. "He's still active," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Whoever did this, they're still here." The realization sent ice through her veins. She thought about Dr. Hendricks, about his too familiar manner, his insistence on personal consultations, his knowledge of her pregnancy before she'd even told him. She thought about the other women in town, the ones who'd lost babies, the ones who'd moved away suddenly and never spoke of their time in Pine Valley. "We need to go," Tom said urgently, and this time Maya didn't resist. They climbed the basement stairs in tense silence, emerging into the late afternoon sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after the horrors below. Reeves followed them up, already on his radio calling for backup and a crime scene team. His face was grim as he ended the call. "I'm posting an officer here tonight," he told them, "and I want you both somewhere else. This is officially an active crime scene." "What about the hospital records?" Maya asked. "The ones from Dr. Hendricks's practice?" "Already on it. We'll have a warrant within the hour." Reeves looked at her seriously. "Maya, I need you to think carefully. Has anyone else known about your pregnancy? Anyone who might have had access to your medical information?" The list was short but troubling. Dr. Hendricks, obviously. His nurse, Janet Mills, who'd worked with him for over 20 years. The lab technician who'd processed her blood work. And then there was Harold Voss, the caretaker who had keys to the cabin, who'd been in Pine Valley his entire life, who would have known about the hidden room all along. "We're staying at my mother's tonight," Tom decided without consulting her, and for once Maya was grateful for his decisiveness. As they packed hastily, throwing clothes and essentials into overnight bags, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made her jump. The cabin that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap, its secrets finally exposed, but its dangers far from over. The baby kicked suddenly, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. Maya pressed her hand to the spot, whispering a silent promise of protection, even as fear gnawed at her resolve. The floorboards groaned beneath Maya's feet as she backed toward the cabin's front door, her hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly. Thomas Henley stood in her kitchen like a shadow from another era, his weathered face bearing the same cruel angles she'd seen in the photograph upstairs. 60 years had carved deep lines around his eyes, but those eyes remained as cold and calculating as ever. "You shouldn't have gone digging, Maya," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." "You killed her," Maya whispered, the words barely audible over the thunder rumbling outside. "You killed Eleanor, and you've been living with it all this time." Thomas stepped closer, and Maya noticed the slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, but from age fighting against determination. Eleanor was going to destroy everything. She was pregnant, demanding I leave my wife, threatening to tell the whole town about us. I couldn't let that happen. The rain hammered against the windows with increasing fury, and Maya realized how isolated she was. No cell service, no neighbors within shouting distance, and the main road already treacherous in weather like this. She'd walked into her own trap. "The police will figure it out," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found the evidence upstairs, the journal, the photographs. Evidence that's about to disappear," Thomas interrupted, pulling something from his jacket pocket. Maya's heart lurched as she recognized the yellowed pages of Eleanor's journal. Funny how old paper burns so easily. "How did you—" Maya started, then remembered the spare key she kept under the flower pot. He'd been watching her, learning her routines, waiting for the right moment. "Did you really think you were the first person to discover that room?" Thomas asked with a bitter laugh. "I've been keeping tabs on this place for decades. Every renter, every visitor. Most people never found it, but occasionally someone would get curious. They learned to keep quiet about what they found." Maya's mind raced. The previous renters who left suddenly, you threatened them too. Threats were usually enough, but you, Maya, you're different. You're stubborn, determined. You remind me of Eleanor in that way. His expression darkened, and we both know how that ended. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs as if sensing the danger. She needed to get out, needed to reach her car, but Thomas stood between her and the keys hanging by the kitchen door. The front door was behind her, but it opened onto a 20-foot drop to the rocky shore below, with no other way down except the single access road that Thomas had likely blocked. "What do you want?" Maya asked, still backing toward the door. "I want this to end. I'm 81 years old, Maya. I've spent 60 years looking over my shoulder, wondering when the past would catch up with me. When I heard someone was renting Eleanor's family cabin again, I knew it was only a matter of time." He held up a small gasoline canister that Maya hadn't noticed before. House fires are common enough in storms like this. Electrical problems, old wiring, very tragic. Maya's hand found the door handle behind her. "You can't just keep killing people to cover up what you did." "I can't?" Thomas set the canister on the counter and began unscrewing the cap. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air. "I've done it before. Eleanor wasn't my only problem over the years. There was a private investigator in the 70s who got too close, a journalist in the 90s who started asking questions about missing persons cases. Amazing how many people simply disappear when they venture too close to dangerous truths." Maya's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about covering up one murder. Thomas Henley was a serial killer who'd been operating in plain sight for decades, hiding behind his respectable small-town facade. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the entire cabin. In that moment of deafening noise, Maya yanked the door open and stumbled outside into the storm. Rain lashed her face immediately, and the wind nearly knocked her off balance. She pressed herself against the cabin wall, looking desperately for another way down from the cliff. "Maya!" Thomas's voice carried over the storm. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She could see the narrow hiking trail that led down to the beach, treacherous even in good weather. In this storm, with her pregnancy making her clumsy and off balance, it would be nearly impossible, but staying meant certain death. Maya took a shaky step toward the trailhead, then another. Behind her, she heard Thomas emerge from the cabin, cursing the weather. Lightning illuminated the churning lake below, and Maya realized she was about to risk everything on a path that might kill her and her baby, even if Thomas never caught up. But as another flash of lightning lit up the forest, Maya saw something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. The storm that had been brewing all evening finally unleashed its fury as Maya pressed herself against the oak tree, watching the cabin through sheets of rain. Lightning illuminated the two figures moving inside, one tall and angular, the other shorter but equally menacing. Through the kitchen window, she could see them systematically searching through her belongings, overturning furniture with methodical precision. Her phone buzzed against her palm. A text from an unknown number. "We know you're out there, Maya. Come inside and we can discuss this civilly." Maya's blood ran cold. They were watching for her reaction, probably had night vision equipment. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, counting her shallow breaths as the baby kicked restlessly inside her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant and hiding in a thunderstorm, this wasn't how she'd imagined her evening going when she'd returned from Dr. Peterson's office with those devastating DNA results. The results that confirmed her worst suspicions about the bones in the secret room. The bones that belonged to Sarah Chen, the missing journalist who'd been investigating the Meridian Corporation's illegal dumping 23 years ago, the same corporation that had recently purchased half the mountain, including Maya's land. Another flash of lightning revealed a third figure emerging from the forest behind the cabin. Maya's heart hammered as she recognized the silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confident stride of someone who owned these woods. Someone she'd trusted completely until 3 hours ago. David. Her husband stepped onto the back porch, shaking rain from his jacket as if this were any normal evening, as if he hadn't just proven himself to be part of the conspiracy that had buried Sarah Chen's story, and Sarah herself, in the ceiling of what would become Maya's home. Through the rain, she heard the muffled sound of voices from inside the cabin. David's voice, familiar and warm, saying words she couldn't quite make out. The same voice that had whispered reassurances during her morning sickness, that had promised to protect their unborn daughter no matter what. Maya pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling another strong kick. The baby seemed to sense her distress, becoming more active as Maya's adrenaline spiked. She needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere she could think and figure out her next move. But every road down the mountain led past the cabin, and they clearly had people positioned to watch for her. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was David calling. After 4 rings it went to voicemail. Immediately another call, then another. On the 4th attempt, Maya answered but remained silent. "Maya, sweetheart, where are you?" David's voice was strained, worried. "There's been a break-in at the house. Someone's ransacked the place looking for something. I need you to come home so I know you're safe." The lie came so easily, so naturally. Maya wondered how many other lies she'd swallowed over the past 2 years of marriage. How many times had he practiced that concerned husband tone while planning her silence? "I know about Sarah Chen," Maya whispered into the phone. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Then David's voice returned, completely different now, colder, more careful. "Where did you hear that name? The DNA results came back today. I know what you did. Maya, you need to understand. This is bigger than you think, bigger than what happened to that reporter. There are people involved who won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're a threat." Through the rain, Maya saw him step closer to the kitchen window, scanning the tree line, looking for her. The phone was helping him triangulate her position. "People like you?" she asked. "I'm trying to protect you. I've been trying to protect you since the day we met. Why do you think I married you? Why do you think I encouraged you to buy this particular cabin?" The words hit like physical blows. Their entire relationship, their marriage, their pregnancy, all of it orchestrated to keep her close, to monitor what she might discover. "The baby," Maya breathed. "Our daughter will be fine if you just come inside and let us explain. But if you run, if you try to expose this, there are people who will see you both as loose ends." Maya ended the call and immediately powered down the phone. The baby was kicking frantically now, responding to Maya's racing pulse and elevated blood pressure. She needed to get somewhere warm and dry, but more importantly, she needed to get somewhere safe. Through the storm, she remembered the old mining tunnel she'd discovered during her first week at the cabin. It was a 1/4 mile through the woods, hidden behind a rockfall that looked natural but wasn't. If she could reach it without being spotted, she might be able to wait out the night and figure out how to get help in the morning. Maya took one last look at the cabin that had been her sanctuary, now crawling with people who wanted her dead. Then she turned deeper into the storm. The hospital room felt sterile and cold against Maya's skin as she clutched the evidence box to her chest. Detective Rodriguez sat beside her bed, his weathered face grave as he reviewed the photographs and documents they'd pulled from the secret room. The baby monitor beside her showed a steady heartbeat. Her daughter was safe, at least for now. "Eleanor Whitmore disappeared in 1987, Rodriguez said, holding up a faded missing persons report. "She was pregnant, just like you. 7 months along when she vanished without a trace." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The parallels were too stark to ignore. And she lived in my cabin? According to these property records, yes. But here's what's interesting. The cabin was owned by the Blackwood family then. Thomas Blackwood specifically. Rodriguez pulled out another document. Ring any bells? The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Thomas Blackwood, the man whose business card she'd found tucked between the floorboards upstairs, the man whose construction company had apparently done work on her cabin just months before Eleanor's disappearance. There's more, Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping lower. I ran the name through our database. Thomas Blackwood died in 1988, less than a year after Eleanor vanished, apparent suicide, according to the report. Left behind a wife and teenage son. Maya felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. The son. What happened to the son? Daniel Blackwood. He'd be about 50 now. Rodriguez met her eyes. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully. Have you met anyone recently who might fit that description? Anyone who seemed unusually interested in you or the cabin? Her blood turned to ice. Dr. Brennan, she whispered. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Dr. Brennan, who had been so attentive during her pregnancy. Dr. Brennan, who had insisted on personally handling her case. Dr. Brennan, who had suggested she move to the remote cabin for peace and quiet. Rodriguez was already on his feet, reaching for his radio. What's his first name? Daniel, Maya breathed. Oh God, it's Daniel. The detective's radio crackled to life as he called for backup, but Maya barely heard him. Everything was falling into place now. The way Dr. Brennan had seemed to know about the cabin before she'd mentioned it, his insistence on regular checkups at his private practice rather than the hospital, the way he'd always asked such specific questions about her daily routines. We need to get you out of here, Rodriguez said, but even as the words left his mouth, the lights in the hospital corridor flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Maya's heart rate monitor began beeping frantically as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her room. He's here, she whispered. Rodriguez drew his weapon, moving to position himself between Maya and the door. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, protect that baby. The door handle turned slowly, and Maya held her breath. But instead of Dr. Brennan, a nurse peeked in, young, nervous, clearly rattled by the power outage. Is everything okay in here? The nurse asked. Dr. Brennan sent me to check on Mrs. Chen. He said there might be complications with the pregnancy. Rodriguez and Maya exchanged a look. The nurse was either innocent or an excellent actress. Where is Dr. Brennan now? Rodriguez asked, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. He's in his office, reviewing patient files. Should I get him? No, Rodriguez said quickly. Actually, we need you to help us get Mrs. Chen to a different room. Security precaution. As they prepared to move, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unlisted, but the words made her blood run cold. Just like Eleanor, you can't run forever. Some sins pass from generation to generation. Your daughter will pay for what was taken from my family. Rodriguez read the message over her shoulder and immediately got back on his radio. We need that backup now. Suspect is in the building. They moved quickly down the corridor, the nurse helping Maya with her forestand while Rodriguez swept ahead. The hospital felt like a maze in the emergency lighting, shadows dancing at every turn. There, Rodriguez whispered, pointing to a secure room near the nurse's station. We can lock down there until... A figure stepped out of an alcove ahead of them. Dr. Brennan, Daniel Blackwood, stood blocking their path, no longer bothering to hide behind his professional facade. In his hand was a syringe filled with clear liquid. Hello, Maya, he said, his voice carrying decades of buried rage. I think it's time we finished what started 37 years ago. My father lost everything because of Eleanor Whitmore, his business, his reputation, his life. She destroyed our family with her lies. What lies? Maya demanded, though her voice shook. Daniel's smile was cold and empty. She claimed he was the father of her baby, ruined him completely. But I know the truth now, and I know how to make things right. He raised the syringe, and Rodriguez raised his gun. In that moment, Maya realized that the past had finally caught up with them all.